Dr. Yoni Witten here. One of the things that I'm constantly pushing my patients to do is to snatch up all the low-hanging fruit that they can. And by that I mean employing as many strategies as possible that can chop down pain levels while requiring a minimal amount of effort on their part. Now, what this allows people to do is to stack up a lot of little victories and over time build up the momentum that's necessary to get to the ultimate goal of permanently resolving their chronic pain. Now, one of the strategies for doing this is essential oils. And this week, I got to sit down with an expert to talk about how to use these oils to cut down pain levels in the body. Let's get into this. Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. Samantha Lee Wright is the creator and director of the Essential Oil Revolution podcast. Thank you so much for being here, Samantha.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I am too, because I know very little, parentheses, nothing about essential oils. And I am excited to have you on so that you can teach me about it and by extension, my audience.
Yeah, I'm excited too. That makes me super happy. And I think by the end of this, you're going to be like, why have I not been incorporating this into the work that I do? It's so easy, so effective, very safe, very approachable. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to turn you into a believer.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I look forward to it. And I come at things, my audience is primarily interested in the resolution of chronic pain. And we tend to approach things from a biomechanical, neurological model. But I see no reason why alternative methods for decreasing pain as we work on those issues can't be incorporated, especially if they have awesome safety records and they're super effective. So I look forward to having my mind open about essential oils. Obviously, what people have been using to manage chronic pain from a pharmacological standpoint, they don't have the type of safety record that you're talking about. We're talking about things like classically non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and opioids more recently, which have turned into just a huge epidemic, which is ongoing. And I think everybody out there is well aware of the damage that they cause, although maybe not to the extent. And so I think a lot of people out there are looking for alternatives. So I find the name of your podcast very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and what you just mentioned, the opioid epidemic specifically, is something that really hits very close to home for me. I have a very close family member of mine has been addicted to opioids for, most of my adult life. And I've seen that completely crash their life. They're not able to hold a job. They're barely able to maintain their relationships. And so that when you had approached me about this interview, I was just like, yes, I really love to talk about this. I don't pretend to be the expert on pain and essential oils necessarily. I consider myself just your everyday average, like Dr. Mom, who sees something that works and uses it and then loves to share about it. But this topic in particular really hits close to home for me. And for so many people out there, we know that 10 times the amount of people are misusing opioids than are using heroin. I mean, that one statistic to me is just mind blowing. And I'm glad to see there's a lot more awareness around that. Now we see, the opioid epidemic. It's a common phrase now. People know it. The problem is there's really not that much being done about it. And that's why I love the work that you're doing, because it's so much about what are the alternatives. And, the earlier that people can adopt those natural alternatives, like you said, if they're safe, if they're effective, even doctors and research studies are showing that the prescription of opioids or just over-the-counter medications is not always the most effective route to go and can sometimes have longer lasting damaging pain than alternatives. So it's all important. You know that I'm preaching to the choir.
How did you get into essential oils? What's your background?
In a nutshell, it's funny enough, you could kind of trace back my origin story all the way back to birth control. When I was young and becoming sexually active, I was like, well, what are my birth control options here? And as a woman researching the options, you just kind of have that moment of like, well, these all suck, I don't like any of these options. And, and so I looked at, the alternative options for that out there, and started learning about fertility awareness and all these sort of other approaches, which led me into just this fascinating world of women's health in particular. So I actually studied and became a doula. I was on track to become a midwife as well. I just very passionate about women's health in particular, and that specific time in a lot of women's lives where they are having babies and giving birth. I became pregnant myself when I had been admitted to nursing school. I remember like getting the letter that I'd finally gotten into nursing school. I was about to start my journey to become a nurse midwife. And then I got unexpectedly pregnant. Anyway, long story short is I've always been a fan of empowering yourself, being the one who's making your medical decisions for your body, reaching out to those alternatives that are out there, not having to be dependent on our Western medical doctrine 100% of the time. I have nothing against Western medicine and doctors. I think there's a time and a place for all of that. But I think that we can't just rely on that. And we have to take that responsibility onto ourselves to be like, what are my options out there that are healthy, that are natural, that use the plant world around us that we've evolved with over, millennia. There's this fascinating connection between plants and humans. If you think about the evolution of plants and these botanicals that have been around us forever, and they've evolved with no feet and no hands, right? They're not able to go out and be like, oh, let me take some of this aspirin because I have a cold or whatever. Like they're not able to feed themselves medicine of what they need to stay healthy. They have to create their own medicine. And that's where essential oils really stem from. They are the medicine that the plants make for themselves to protect themselves against disease, fungi. If a branch gets snapped, it's the essential oils that come out and help that wound heal, as it were. And these plants have evolved right next to human beings for this whole time. And we're all rooted in the same chemical compounds. We're all these carbon beings. And so I find this really beautiful relationship between humans' ability to recognize that medicine that's inside these plants and utilize them in our own bodies. And I mean, we know that so much of our medicine that we have today is rooted in plants. Aspirin came from meadow sweet flower, right? Yet, although we know the origin story of so many modern pharmaceuticals are rooted in plants, there's only been about 3% of the plant world that has yet to be studied for their medicinal properties. And most of those studies have been kind of haphazard, honestly, too. So to me, there's just so much that the plant world can offer us that we're not utilizing, that we're not studying enough, that we're only beginning to understand the potential.
Well, it's an interesting way that you came at it from just an extension of natural living, and looking for healthy alternatives. I totally relate to what you're talking about as well, about being your advocate for your own health, and all of that stems from educating yourself for the options that are available out there, like you did when you started out your journey into natural means of birth control, because yes, a lot of the options that are out there do suck. And speaking about options that suck, many of the options that are available as the first tier options for people with chronic pain, those also suck. And they have a pretty horrible list of side effects. You're talking with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, 100,000 plus hospitalizations every single year, and thousands upon thousands of deaths that go with that. And yet, they're often the number one thing that's prescribed with no thought given to those side effects. Opioids, as you mentioned with your family member, absolutely devastating. And a leading cause of death at this point for Americans under the age of 50. So let's jump into, you mentioned just a second ago at the tail end of what you were saying, that the essential oils from the plants are their means of defense and healing themselves and all of these things. So can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I said, plants have evolved without feet or hands, right? They're not able to move themselves to safety. They're not able to pop a pill or an herbal extract when they're sick, right? They've evolved to have to really be this self-sustaining machine that provides themselves with everything they need to grow and to live and to reproduce. And there's a lot of botanical philosophy and theories that have gone into, why flowers are flowers, right? Why are flowers so beautiful? Well, maybe it's because humans are attracted to that, and so they help that plant proliferate and whatnot. But when you get down to the science of essential oils, the essential oil of a botanical, let's say a rose flower or a rose bush, for example, is the part of that plant that gives it the smell. It's what makes a rose smell like a rose. It's what makes peppermint smell like peppermint. So, every day people are out in the world. If you go outside, if you sit under a pine tree, you are inhaling essential oils when you smell the pine of the pine tree. And, I like to make the metaphor, the analogy between humans and plants. If you wanted to make a correlation, the essential oil of the plant is almost like the blood of the plant, as in our blood is what, defends us against disease and colds and flus. It's really what makes us tick and makes us live. It's the blood. And so essential oils are kind of like the blood of the plant. And it's what makes them smell really good. And there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of theory that can go behind why they smell so good. It's probably because they want to be attractive to humans, because we have this kind of back and forth relationship of keeping each other healthy, safe, and reproducing, right?
Interesting. And so it's thought of as a cycle. So they help us in these obvious ways. How do we help them?
Yeah, well, we help plants grow, specifically flowers, which essential oils come from all plants, not just flowers. But I like to think about, roses don't really serve much of a purpose in human existence besides just looking pretty, right? I mean, we can't eat them. They're not that helpful of a plant besides they're just beautiful. And so we have helped rose bushes reproduce more. We grow them, we help them spread, and things like that. If you look at the World Trade Organization of different plants that have been spread all over the continent, thanks to human beings, you can see how there is that reciprocal kind of relationship between the two. Especially, I like to take an approach to, stewardship with the plant world. Humans, I think we take on a responsibility to be stewards of the earth, and the essential oil industry in particular. There's a lot of back and forth between, is it a good industry? Is it not? Does it hurt plants? Does it help plants? And that really comes down to who's doing the producing, and are they doing that ethically and responsible? Because it does take a lot of plant material to make one bottle of essential oil. I think it takes about 250 pounds of rose petals to make like 1 ounce of rose essential oil. So wow. If those roses are being grown unethically, if they're being sprayed with a ton of pesticides, or if they're being, they're not rotating the crops and really taking a sustainability approach, then it can be a damaging practice and industry. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for knowing where your oils are coming from, who's growing them, how they're being sourced, because there can be the opposite effect of really helping proliferate the plant world and doing it in a sustainable, ethical way that is helping and not harming the earth.
That's interesting. Before we get into the differences between different oils that are out there and production methods and all these things, can you just talk about how the oil gets out of the plant? Is it a compression? Is it a distillation process? How does that work?
Yeah, it depends a lot on the plant that you're starting with. So different plants, you extract the essential oil in different ways. The most common way is through a steam distillation. Okay. So let's take peppermint, for example, you would harvest a whole bunch of fresh peppermint leaves, throw those into, imagine a giant cylinder of vat, and you close the lid on that, and then you steam up from the bottom. This steam comes up. Different companies have different approaches. If you do a really high heat, then it's going to kill off a lot of the therapeutic benefits that are in the plants. If you do a low steam heat, then it takes a lot longer, but you get a lot more of that therapeutic property out of the plant. But essentially that steam gets risen from the top, captured in the top, and then the water molecule is separated from the essential oil molecule that comes out of that and gets put into a bottle. So that's the most typical way. If you look at the fruit world, oranges, lemons, grapefruit, those essential oils are extracted from the rind of the plant. More like a cold press situation, almost like olive oil.
I see.
And then there's a couple other, examples of roots, or like the frankincense tree. The oil actually comes from the resin. So they have to essentially cut the tree, let the resin seep out, collect that, cure that in caves for a while, and then do a distillation process.
So you just mentioned frankincense there. That's an interesting segue here into talking about specific oils that are good for dealing with chronic pain or good for dealing with pain in general.
Yeah, well, frankincense is actually number one on my list. It's one that has been studied, but as you said, the studies that are done are interesting in the fact that they are very specific. So like one study that I like to cite for frankincense is a study done on cancer patients who are undergoing treatment. They would rub frankincense, they would massage frankincense into their hands, and to see if there was a reduction in pain. And there was a large report from most of the people in that study that said it did increase their comfort. And so it's a wonderful oil for that. It's a very soothing oil. And as I'm sure you could probably talk about more eloquently than I could, Yoni, is the correlation between stress and anxiety and pain, right? There's a cycle there. And so if we can cut that stress, anxiety, or tense cycle, right? If your body's tense, you're going to feel more pain. If we can lessen that, if we can stop that cycle in its tracks, it can severely decrease our pain or increase our comfort. And frankincense is one that can do that almost instantaneously. I remember a day where I was working at Panera Bread, just with my computer, and there was this one employee. She was running around. You can just tell sometimes when some employees are having really bad days, right? So she's like running around, just obviously very frantic, having a tough day. And she comes over to my table, and I just happened to have some essential oils out. I had frankincense like rubbed all over me at that point because I love that oil. And she just comes up and she goes, "Oh, it smells really good over here." And I was like, "Yeah, it does. You want some?" And she was like, "Yeah, I do." So I just put a couple drops of frankincense in her hand, and I was like, "Just rub that over your neck and on your shoulders and on your chest." And she was like, "Okay," and did it, and, walked away. And then she came back, like 30 seconds later, she just immediately came back and was like, "What is that stuff? Like, I feel so much better." And like, she actually gave me a hug and was just like, "Thank you for that." I was like, thank the Frank, man. It's amazing.
That's amazing. So that happened within minutes. Now, my question on that is, rubbing on the skin, is it getting into the bloodstream that fast, or is she just inhaling the fumes of it, or has that aspect of it been researched? I would have thought that it would take a little longer to get into the bloodstream, so it must have been through inhalation.
It's very quick, actually. The quickest is through inhalation. So that's likely the first experience that she had, was just the smell of it. So when essential oil molecules travel up the nose through the smell receptors, that goes, lightning speed, instantaneous, up into the limbic system of our brain. There's a direct correlation between scent and your limbic system, which your limbic system in a nutshell is responsible for a lot of emotions, a lot of, parasympathetic mode of the body. And so can very easily calm you down, from that direct scent experience. But those molecules also travel through the lungs, which very quickly disseminates into the bloodstream. But also when you put essential oils onto your skin, they absorb very quickly into the bloodstream. I think one study cited 22 seconds to reach every single cell in your body.
Wow.
I don't know how that study was conducted, so don't totally quote me on that one, but we do know that it has a very quick instantaneous reaction. Like if you put peppermint oil, let's say, on the bottom of your feet, peppermint has a very distinct taste. You can taste that peppermint in your mouth within about 20 to 30 seconds.
Wow.
If you're sensitive enough to feel it. I mean, I've definitely tasted it before. So the really interesting thing about essential oils, Yoni, and I'm not a scientist, so forgive me for my lack of sophisticated words here, but the molecules on a molecular level, essential oils are very, very, very tiny compared to other molecules. So, one drop of essential oil has, millions of just these tiny little molecules that are so small that they travel through our entire body so easily and like lightning speed. In fact, they're one of the only substances that we know can actually travel past the blood-brain barrier and go into our brains, and that's a big deal. I mean, scientists and pharmaceutical companies specifically have been really fighting, trying to find how can we make medicine that can pass the blood-brain barrier so that we can give medicine that will reach, tumors in the brain or reach parts of the brain. And they've failed time and time again because those pharmaceutical components are typically just too big. The molecules themselves are too large. The blood-brain barrier, which is this protective barrier between your body and your brain, is like, nope, you're not allowed to pass through. You're too big or you're too dangerous. But essential oils, they're like, oh yeah, come on in. It's a party up here. Like, we like you. Come on up. So.
I like your explanation. That's a good one. It's very interesting. I saw a 2020 meta-analysis that spoke specifically about essential oils being very effective for maternal anxiety and labor pain. And I don't have a woman in my life, whether a family member or a patient, who would not have liked to have a little bit of extra help with no side effects in the delivery room. So that was a cool study. I enjoyed that. What's number 2 on your list?
Number 2 on my list is copaiba, or some people call it copaiba. It's COPAIBA. I call it copaiba, but because it's more fun. Yeah. So the copaiba I like to talk about next to frankincense, because the two of those to me are just the perfect pair to mix those two together and to use them in combination. For example, my mother-in-law, she suffers from arthritis. She's had 2 knee replacements. She's looking at getting a hip replacement soon. She's just always suffered from that. So I make her this muscle rub, and I always like, you can get your own essential oils and make this yourself. And she's like, no, just do it for me. Like, all right, I'll be the good daughter-in-law. So I make her this muscle rub that is mostly frankincense and copaiba. There are a few other oils in there that I'll throw in. They are wintergreen and peppermint, and we can talk about those two as well. But frankincense and copaiba are really that power punch combination of tackling the, frankincense I think of as the calmer, that instant, oh, I feel better already scent. And then copaiba, I think of more of the physical heavy hitter, the one that really goes into the muscles, the joints, and it assists the body's natural ability to fight inflammation. So I think of it as that heavy hitter on the physical side.
Interesting. And you're making a rub out of that. So does that mean you're adding it to some kind of a base? And if so, what kind of base are you using?
Yeah, I always recommend when you're new to essential oils to always mix your essential oils with some sort of base, or what we call a carrier oil. And that can be literally any fatty based oil. My go-to is coconut oil, especially for like a muscle rub, because it's kind of thick and it's easy to just, scoop it and put it on. Coconut oil, but jojoba oil, almond oil, olive oil, any of those fatty based oils are really great at extending the essential oils and diluting it down so that the essential oils, which are obviously very potent substances, aren't hitting your skin just bare, because that can cause like a rash or something like that. Some of them are more gentle than others, like lavender, frankincense, copaiba even are pretty gentle. And I have personally used those undiluted myself, but for general safety concerns, I always say just always dilute until you know your oils and you know yourself a little better.
So a little bit goes a long way.
It does. Yeah. So for that muscle rub, I'll do, let's say a 1/4 cup of coconut oil and then about 15 drops each of frankincense, copaiba, wintergreen, and peppermint.
Okay. So that'll last her quite a while.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just a little bit does go a very long way.
And is this a situation, Samantha, where one oil enhances the effect of another?
That can definitely be the case. There's a lot of synergy that happens between essential oils that we're really only just beginning to understand all those different interactions. A really common practice, though, for example, is like, let's say you're having some intense pain in your knees. Maybe you want to put on some frankincense, some copaiba, maybe some wintergreen in there, and you can layer those on. And then if you finish that with a layer of peppermint oil, peppermint is known as a driver and can actually drive those essential oils deeper into the muscles and drive it in there a little bit faster. If you do that layering technique. I'm a little lazy, so I tend to just mix everything together.
So you're saying that if I took that frankincense and copaiba and the coconut base and put it on, and then afterward, do I have to wait a while, or can I do it immediately afterwards?
No, immediately. Yeah, I can do it immediately afterward, and then it'll drive it in.
And in that one, do I need the carrier oil for the peppermint as well?
For the peppermint, if you've already got enough coconut oil like in your carrier base, then you'd probably be fine. It's going to kind of mix in there, unless you're extremely sensitive and you just want to be extra cautious. Then you're welcome to pre-dilute those. But it can be really simple. Like, I have a very simple, I call it the lazy person's approach to essential oils. So, I'm not into all the kind of pre-mixing and all that stuff. It just takes too many bottles and too much time.
Well, I think
I like to literally
the fast version.
Yeah, the fast approach to me is just literally take a goober of a coconut oil, put it in the palm of your hand, take your essential oil bottle, add a couple drops, mix it right there in your palm and slap it on. That's like my fast, quick approach.
And then if you wanted to drive it in hard, you would go a little bit of peppermint right over the top of it.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Very, very interesting. What's your number 3 or number 3 and 4? I think you mentioned 2 together.
Yeah, well, wintergreen and peppermint, I'll just speak on for a second. Wintergreen, especially, the predominant natural ingredient in wintergreen essential oil is methyl salicylate, which is a very commonly used compound. It's very closely related to aspirin. It's a very intense compound, so that's one that you definitely always want to dilute. And it's one that you also never want to take internally, which we haven't really talked about that yet, but certain essential oils you can safely take internally. Wintergreen is not one of those. You definitely don't want to take that one in, but it's a very soothing oil for the muscles, for the joints. I had a friend who broke his, it was his femur, I think it was, that he broke. He was in the hospital for a very long time. And he wasn't, because of his cast, he wasn't actually able to put wintergreen onto his legs, which normally that would be my go-to, would be to just apply the wintergreen directly to the problem area. But he wasn't able to do that. So he actually just held the bottle of wintergreen under his nose in the hospital and just sniffed really deep breaths in and out throughout that process. And he was measuring his pain level mentally. And he said, it would definitely come down very quickly when he was inhaling that wintergreen, which I thought was really fascinating. And there are, like you talked about, essential oils working together. There are some studies that point to peppermint, when used in combination with wintergreen, they actually work better together versus separately.
Yes, and I saw a few studies that had peppermint combined with other things as well. That seems to be one of the ones that popped up again and again and again. There was one here that I had never heard of, which was Bergamot, which was a 2021 meta-analysis of 30 studies, and that one was shown to have actually, in that study, it was the only essential oil that had proven efficacy with 2 different types of pain pathways, both nociceptive and neurogenic. So it worked on pain from multiple angles and had very convincing results. Do you have any experience with bergamot?
Yeah, so bergamot, or bergamot, you can pronounce them either way, is a citrus plant. So a lot of people don't recognize it as a citrus, which it's important to know that, just for a quick safety tip, Yoni, real quick, is you never want to put a citrus oil directly on your skin that's going to be exposed to sunlight. So that's kind of one of the only important safety rules to be aware of with essential oils. So bergamot is a citrus oil, and all the citrus oils, orange, bergamot, lime, lemon, they all have this extremely uplifting effect to our mood, to our brains. And as I talked about earlier, that emotional component between pain and stress and anxiety is really, really strong. And so for me, I feel like bergamot is one of the most calming oils. I put it kind of next to frankincense for its ability to just instantly make people go, oh, I feel better. I feel happier. Right. And so, yeah, I'm curious though, the study that you were pointing at, I haven't actually seen that. So were they talking about like applying that topically and it helping with the physical aspect of pain, or was it more of the emotional component they were studying?
They were specifically going after the nociceptive, which is like basically subconscious pain signaling in the body. It actually showed an ability to decrease that. So before it technically registered as conscious pain, and then the neuropathic pain model. So it was actually interrupting the transmission of the pain signals.
Yeah,
so
that's fascinating.
Really
I believe it. Yeah.
Well, it's a brand new study, and I only looked at it just the other day. So, but I'm happy to send it to you.
Yeah, I'd love to see that too. It reminds me too, kind of a tangent, another recent study, which I love that there's so much more research being done around this area. It's just like every day you're like, oh, wow, we've proven this to be true and whatnot. But there's this other study that my friend Eric Zelinsky was telling me about where they put these two groups of humans into two separate rooms. And these volunteers came in and they were told like, okay, the point of this study is like, we're going to try to tackle a really impossible problem. You guys have 20 minutes to work together and try to solve the problem of systemic racism in America. And these two groups are like, okay, like, don't know how to do that, but 20 minutes, let's solve it. Right. And so one group, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem at all, right? 20 strangers solving systemic racism in 20 minutes. So one group was put in a room with no scent in the air, and then the other group was given a room with a scent of orange and vanilla together, combined, going. And the result of that study was that the group that had the aromas going in the air came out much more positive, right? So no one solved racism in 20 minutes, but the group that had the orange and vanilla going felt much more optimistic about the process, less distressed about it, less frustrated, just in general, more willing to tackle the problem and work together and less focus on the despair part of it. Right.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I thought that was
out to everybody immediately, Samantha.
I know, exactly. I mean, that's what I love about essential oils. They're so easy to use. So if like today you're like, oh man, that orange vanilla combo sounds really great. I could use a little less despair in my life, then just go out, buy yourself a diffuser, which if you're not familiar, it's just this little machine that typically you put water in the bottom, you put a couple drops of essential oil in, you press a button and it pushes that essential oils up into the air, and it smells good and they're pretty and they're fun and everything. And it's just as simple as that.
Nice. That's awesome. What's next on the list? Give me another good one.
Yeah. So I'll give you a recipe if that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's for a friend of mine. She suffers from fibromyalgia and she loves massaging.
Awesome for my audience.
Yeah. She loves to massage this into her joints. And that is a combination of bergamot, which you had mentioned already, bergamot, rosemary, and peppermint oil. Into her joints. So those, we've already talked about bergamot and peppermint. Rosemary is just, it's one of those, I call it the herbaceous category of essential oils, things like rosemary and marjoram, things like that. These are really basic herbs that we use every day for in the kitchen, or, pretty much any medicinal therapeutic herbal cabinet's going to have those kind of base herbal medicines in it. So that's a great one. And then you can also do a bath soak with Epsom salts, cypress essential oil, rosemary, juniper, and copaiba. So that's another combination. So there's a lot of options.
But the fibromyalgia rub, one more time, was bergamot, peppermint,
rosemary. Okay. Yeah. Mix that with the carrier oil and massage that into your joints.
Beautiful. Yeah. So for all the fibromyalgia sufferers out there, we got a perfect recipe for you guys. And the Epsom salt bath was also something that she's using?
Yeah. So Epsom salt soak, which alone, doesn't everyone just love an Epsom salt soak? It's just, to me, that was like my childhood. My mom, if I ever complained about anything, she's like, get in the bath, I'll put some Epsom salts in, right? But Epsom salts with cypress, rosemary,
and copaiba.
Juniper, and copaiba,
Okay.
and just two drops of each of those. So that's, 2, 4, 6, 8 drops total in your bath is plenty. If you're brand new to essential oils, you might actually want to cut that back to just 1 drop each.
Okay.
Start out nice and slow.
Okay.
Mix that with at least like a 1/4 cup of Epsom salt.
Okay.
And you're good to go.
That's awesome. That's really good information. One of the things that I noticed, Samantha, when I was going through the research, is that there was these very specific oils for very specific pains, and then these meta-analyses where they were reviewing multiple studies. And a lot of times the meta-analyses didn't work out favorably, but they all came back with, there's some studies that show these really promising results. There's others that are not. So we're inconclusive, and basically we need to do more research. And some of the things that got the studies into trouble were qualities of the oils. In other words, if I take copaiba from 3 or 4 different essential oil manufacturers, they're not all the same. They're not all the same strength. They're not all the same purity, and they're not all free from other things that maybe shouldn't be in there.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for bringing this up, because it really is the crux of the issue in a lot of the flack, let's say, that essential oils get on the internet or from different people. And it also brings up this other fascinating side of, let's say that, all the studies that are done on essential oils out there, I highly doubt that most of them are done with the highest quality level of essential oils, just because there's really honestly such a lack of understanding around what that even means. So a lot of these researchers are like, yeah, let's study, orange essential oil and do this study. And they're not really thinking that hard about what brand or what quality of oil they're using. Yet, despite that, we still see a lot of really positive results, right? So that, to me, I think is really fascinating, because one thing about essential oils that's important to understand is they're really twofold. You've got the aromatic experience, the scent experience, which is very, very powerful. But then you've also got the physical component of essential oils, which is also highly powerful. But that physical side is, I'd say, much more dramatically affected than the aromatic side when it comes to quality control. So, that aside, it is really fascinating. If you look at any industry in the world, let's look at, olive oil or bread. I like to make this bread analogy. If you go into your dollar store and you find a loaf of bread, like let's say Wonder Bread on the shelf for $1, and you buy it and you eat it, it's going to fill your belly. It's going to taste like bread. It might smell good, but compare that to, let's say, the $9 loaf of bread you buy from your farmer's market that comes from, sprouted, germinated wheat or whatever, or sourdough bread that you eat, you take home, that tastes good, probably tastes a little different, smells good. They're both technically bread. They're both going to nourish your body, but what they're doing nutritionally in your body, the effects that it's having on your body are very, very different. Wouldn't you agree?
So, yeah, just to make the point there. So if I go buy orange oil or bergamot from 2 different companies, they might smell the same, but their physical effects could be extremely different, in the same way that eating Wonder Bread versus home baked, mama made it in the kitchen with the sprouted wheat, as you're saying, it's going to be a very different nutritional effect once it gets inside your body. And we do need to mention again, for people that are not super essential with essential oils, super familiar with essential oils, rather, that it is getting into your bloodstream. So quality does matter, even though sometimes it may be just going on through the skin.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I say, people, quality matters, price matters. You are going to have to pay more for a good quality essential oil, but what you're paying for, it's going to last so much longer and it's going to work. It's going to be effective. It breaks my heart when people tell me all the time, oh, I tried essential oils and they didn't work. And I'm like, I don't mean to be a snob, but like, where'd you get your essential oils? And they're like, oh, I just went to the gas station and got some off the shelf. And I'm like, no, don't buy gas station oils. It's not the same. And especially knowing what we know about chemicals. I mean, the whole reason that essential oils sort of fell out of fashion, and it was like the 1940s, 1930s. It used to be that we pretty much flavored everything with essential oils, but then this chemical revolution came along where scientists were like, oh, like we know how to make things taste good and smell good now without having to use plants. We can now concoct these in a laboratory using synthetic ingredients, and that really kind of took over. And that was when, humans were like, ooh, science, everything about science is better. And so much cheaper, it is astronomically cheaper to make your shampoo smell like lavender using chemicals versus using actual lavender extracts and botanicals. So, 99% of the things that you would buy at the grocery store, if they're flavored or scented with, lavender or lime or whatever, it's very rare that there is even a trace of actual real lavender botanical extract in that. It's more likely synthesized in a laboratory somewhere. And it's amazing. I mean, I marvel sometimes at scientists being able to really extract those components from nature and be like, oh yeah, we know how to make lavender scent in a bottle. I mean, that is truly remarkable to me. But let's not confuse that with what I'm talking about, which is the therapeutic use of actual pure essential oils, that nothing is inside that bottle except for the plant juice, what I like to call it, the plant juice. And it's an industry that is rampant with fake essential oils because it is a very, very unregulated industry. And I'm not much of a fan for over-regulation in our life. No one likes the government to come in and be like, you're not allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to do that. I do wish there was more regulation in the essential oil world, because there is nothing legally stopping anyone of taking a bottle, putting literally junk inside that bottle and labeling it as quote unquote 100% pure therapeutic essential oil.
Wow. So
there is nothing.
There's no regulation in that industry.
I mean, on a scale from 0 to 100, there's maybe like 5% regulation. It's very, very little. Okay. And so that a lot of people are like, well, I'll just buy organic essential oil and that'll solve it. And it doesn't solve the problem. I think organic, I don't know the technical, I don't know everything down to the technical level for this, but even essential oils that are labeled 100% organic or USDA organic, that's really only referring to the way that the plants were grown that were used in the production. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's also free of other additives or other, synthetics or whatnot. And it certainly doesn't have any regard to how that oil was distilled. So as I was talking about really earlier on in this interview, some companies will do a super high heat distillation, and that's much cheaper. It gets a lot more of that essential oil out faster, or they might add in a bunch of binders to that process that extract more and more of that oil out very quickly. It's going to smell like peppermint. It's going to technically be 100% organic, but it might not have the same therapeutic effect that a peppermint that was distilled at a very low temperature, that's much more expensive to do. It takes a lot longer, but it's going to capture more of the plant magic, as I like to call it.
Okay. So that's fair. So to recap, don't buy your oils at a gas station. And what's
Walmart?
what's the best, what are some of the better companies to go with, or what's the best way to safeguard yourself and make sure that what it says on the bottle is actually what you're putting into your body?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that I have a lot of sympathy for people out there that want to get started and they want to do their own research, because The internet is just not a friendly place, as we all know, and it can be very confusing. But I'll just say flat out, I found a source that I trust a long time ago. I did a lot of research. I've been to the farms. I was introduced to them first. That is Young Living essential oils, and they really are the gold standard in the industry of what it means to produce a therapeutic quality essential oil. There have been other companies that have popped up. I just can't personally speak to them and their level of quality, but I can firsthand say I've been to Young Living's farms. I've done extensive research on their processes, the way that they partner with farms, the way that they distill and test their oils. I mean, they're the real deal. They really produce an authentic essential oil because that's their mission. And it's important to understand that a lot of essential oil companies might be making a fine product. There's nothing junky in it, let's say, but their purpose isn't necessarily to produce a authentic, highly therapeutic grade essential oil. They might be more focused on, I just want to make an oil that doesn't have a bunch of junk in it and smells really good. Mm-hmm. And that's great. It's just not quite the same thing as when you prioritize capturing all of those very complex molecules and therapeutic properties by distilling in a certain way or a certain temperature or harvesting at a certain, I mean, Young Living goes through some ridiculous stuff, I'd say, for prioritizing, capturing really high quality, like their Melissa farm, for example. Melissa is a plant that is very, very sensitive to lots of external factors. When they harvest the Melissa plant, I get such a kick out of this story. They harvest it. The employees that work on the farms are not allowed to come to work if they're in a grumpy mood, if they're having a bad day. Wow. They're not allowed to use curse words around the Melissa plants. And when it's harvest day, they go and they cut the Melissa, and it's not allowed to touch the ground. It has to be captured like on a cloth, and it has to be carried to the distillery. I mean, it's kind of bonkers. I love it. I'm like, they're equally into the science as they are into like the woo-woo side of it, of how do we really protect the plants energetically for therapeutic property.
That's awesome. What's the way that most people use essential oils? Are they using them for aromatherapy type things, or are they rubbing it directly on the skin? And which ones are suitable to be eaten? Are any of the ones that we mentioned today that are very good for pain capable of being eaten?
Yeah. So I'd say the most popular way most people get started with essential oils is the aromatic side, the putting it in a diffuser, having it going in their homes, in their air, and they're just simply smelling and inhaling the essential oil in through their lungs and through their nose. And that is a highly effective way of using essential oils. I love it. And I think for beginners too, especially, it's this very non-intimidating way to get started. So, I always say if that's the only way you ever use essential oils, then good for you. That's fine. That's great. You can also just simply smell them directly from the bottle too. I keep a bottle of one of my favorite blends. It's called Stress Away. I put that in my car and I just have it there. And if I'm having a bit of a stressful day in my car, I just open it up and I just sniff it right from the bottle. It can be as simple as that. And then there's the topical way, right? Where we put it on our skin. As I said earlier, you always want to dilute. But that's a very simple way to use them. And one easy tip for beginners for using essential oils topically is invest in some roller balls. Those are just, like tubes, preferably glass tubes that have a little metal roller ball on the top. And you can pre-mix those. So you can add some carrier oil, like fractionated coconut oil is really great. It's the liquefied version of coconut oil. Put that in there, top it off with some essential oils. And then ready to go. You can just literally roll that onto like the back of your neck or, up your spine or something like that on the bottom of your feet. And that just keeps your hands from being greasy all the time, which is really, really convenient. That's topical. And then internal is using essential oils, whether that be in your cooking. I love to add a couple drops of peppermint to my brownie batter or a couple drops of orange to my waffle batter. And it's just super delicious, or lemongrass in some soup. So good. So that's a simple way, but you can also put them in capsules. So you can buy, an empty capsule and fill it with essential oil. Always top that off with olive oil or some other fatty based oil that you can eat internally. So I use like a little little dropper, like eyedropper, to fill up my capsules with olive oil and essential oil. And that's a very common use of essential oils. Like in France, you can go to the pharmacy and buy lavender pills, like lavender essential oil pills in capsules. Or some people like to put it in tea or sip it in water. And those are simple ways. Now, when you're using essential oils internally, especially, all ways that you use essential oils, you want to be using a high quality, but especially if you're taking it internally, you don't want to mess around and use those gas station oils in your pills and whatnot. That is not going to be good news. And just always take it really slow. I say, if you're brand new to essential oils, start with just one drop, and just listen to your body. There's so much complexity around essential oils that I never want to take for granted how an essential oil might react or how it might cause some sort of reaction in somebody, especially if you're on a medication or if you're pregnant, or, there's just so many factors that go into using anything safely, not just essential oils, right? Tylenol or, spinach, like you can eat too much spinach and have a reaction. So I always just err on the side of caution. If you're new to something, take it really, really slow and really listen to your body. But all that being said, in general, when we compare essential oils to really anything else on this planet, they are extremely safe and approachable for everyday people to use. Despite what the internet might tell you, right? There's like a lot of fear on the internet around those sort of special cases. So, and those really quickly, if you own a cat or if you're pregnant or you're using oils on babies or taking certain medications, then you can still use essential oils very, very safely and effectively. You just want to take a little time to do a little extra research or reach out to me and I can help you answer your questions around that as well.
That's awesome. And where can people find you for more information about your podcast and essential oils in general?
Yeah. So my home on the internet for all things essential oils is my website, revolutionoilspodcast.com. And that is the website for my podcast, which is a different name, The Essential Oil Revolution. There's a long story behind why there's two different names there, but revolutionoilspodcast.com will get you to the podcast if you want to listen to an essential oil obsessed podcast. And there's lots of freebies there. There's a free oil course you can take if you're brand new to oils and you want just those basic reminders of the safety, reminders of what are some of those everyday uses of essential oils. You can grab that at freeoilcourse.com.
freeoilcourse.com. And I'll put a link for that in the description down below. I want to thank you so much for spending the time here with me today and sharing your top essential oils for pain and the mother-in-law recipe and the fibromyalgia recipe and the bath recipe. That's all good stuff. I know my audience is going to dig it and really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you'll put the information to good use. If you want to know more about essential oils and all the things they can be used for, you've got to check out the Essential Oil Revolution and Samantha Lee Wright's podcast. I'm going to include links for both in the description down below. Make sure to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the new videos that come out each week. That's all for now. See you next time.